now to introduce your keynote speaker, Dr. Tony Blau. Tony founded All for Cure after 27 years as a professor of medicine, hematology, and physician scientist at the University of Washington. His research has spanned chemotopiosis, maybe you can correct me, Dr. Blau, gene therapy, stem cell biology, genomics and cancer, consistently focusing on bringing the very latest research advances to patients with incurable diseases. At UW, he founded the Center for Cancer Innovation, which brings together a distributed network of investigators to help patients with advanced cancer. Tony co-founded the UW Institute for Stem Cell and Regenerative Medicine and chaired the Molecular and Cellular Hematology Study section for the National Institutes of Health. He has authored more than 85 scientific publications. Diagnosed himself with myeloma in April 2015, Tony infuses All for Cure with an incredible sense of urgency to improve the prospects for cancer patients now and into the future. We are thrilled to have him join us, and I'd love to pass it over to Dr. Tony Blau.
Thank you, Shelley. Thanks very much. It's a real honor to be here to get to see you guys and present what we're up to. So I'll share my screen. It's disabled at the moment. The host will need to.
As Tony, I'm going to do that right now for you.
Okay, there you go.
There you go. Yes. All right. You are good to go.
Okay. There we go. So, yeah, I'll just tell you a little bit about my story, where we, how I got to do what we're doing. Give you a little bit of background as well. So as Shelley was saying, I'm an old guy. I've been at the University of Washington in the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center back since 1989. And I came to Seattle to learn a procedure known as bone marrow transplantation. Today, it's more commonly referred to as stem cell transplantation. And that procedure attracted me because it's really cool, really kind of cool, physiology and science. But the thing that most attracted me to it was the idea that you would have a patient with a fatal blood disease that you would try to save their lives through this really intensive procedure that would involve giving the patient massive doses of chemotherapy and radiation often, trying to wipe out their leukemia. In the meantime, you're also wiping out their normal bone marrow cells, or body's ability to make blood. And now you give them the stem cells from another person. That's the procedure that I came to Seattle to learn, called allogeneic stem cell transplantation. And so it was kind of this very dramatic thing. People would come to Seattle from all over the world with these really, very tough situations, in the hope that we would be able to treat them and help them get through this very tight spot and live to be a little old man or woman someday. And this is a picture of me back many years ago when I had hair on the transplant unit with the daughter of one of our patients. And then, so I came to learn this procedure. I stayed at the University of Washington to do mainly research and see patients a little bit of the time. As Shelley was saying, I've done things in other areas of medicine and other areas of hematology. But about 10 years ago, actually a little more than 10 years ago, I went with my wife, Sibel, and Sibel's going to talk in a little bit. She's an oncologist, a hematologist oncologist who works in Puyallup. And Sibel was going to the cancer meeting, the big cancer meeting, back, I think, in 2008. And for the first time, I kind of tagged along with her because my research wasn't in cancer. But in 2008, we went to the big cancer meeting in Chicago called the ASCO meeting, the American Society of Clinical Oncology meeting. And at that meeting, I concluded, or I felt like patients with incurable cancer were not given access to some of the latest technologies that I was using as a researcher in my lab. You know, one thing you become impressed with as a researcher is how fast research improves, how fast technology improves. And it seemed to me like patients with incurable cancers weren't getting access to that kind of state-of-the-art, very latest technology. I used to tell people that I could understand better what was going on in a mouse in my lab with all of these, very sophisticated technologies than Sibel could understand in what's going on in her patients. And so in 2013, we wanted to try to figure out what does it mean to do our best for a patient now, 15 years after I came to Seattle, and with all of the newest technologies, is there a way to, what would it mean to do the very best that the world could do for a patient with an incurable form of cancer? And so we started this entity at the University of Washington called the Center for Cancer Innovation, and it had a few principles. The first was that a lot of the DNA sequencing and RNA sequencing and proteomic technology was just becoming available. You can collect billions of data points from a patient, but the problem is you really can't understand what all that data means. It's easy to get the data. It's super hard to understand what it means. And so our idea was, let's take a patient with a terrible form of cancer. Let's throw, the best effort that we can at characterizing that patient's cancer with all these, sequencing technologies, collecting billions of data points. Let's put the information on the cloud. Let's make it accessible to experts from around the world who would try to help us understand the patient's situation. And then let's allow the patient to be treated in accordance with these predictions, and then use what happens in the patient to understand whether our predictions were right or wrong. So to do this, you have to bring together experts from many different areas. You need computer science people, you need, oncologists, obviously, hematologists, companies, things like that. That's so kind of bringing together people with different areas of expertise was one of our big principles. The other idea was that we didn't want to be confined to a single institution. We wanted to be able to collaborate with anyone in the world who could potentially help us better understand, better treat a patient. And then trying to take all of the data that we get from a cancer patient and interpret it. So thinking of cancer fundamentally as a data problem, not a black box, but something that really, if we were smart enough, could be understood at a very deep level. And then the other idea is, if a patient has a form of cancer where the treatment always fails and patients always die, then why not open those situations up to, giving the patient access to anything that a research lab that might be able to offer that could potentially be helpful. And then monitoring patients closely over time. So we started some get-togethers that we called them Pizza, Beer, Omics, and Cancer, that brought together a bunch of people. This is a picture from now many years ago, but it had, oncologist Frank Sinicol, will be known to many of you, but also at academic places, at the SCCA, university computational biologists. Rob McCroskey and Sibel are oncologists as well, high school student, people in industry. But then also a patient, and this is Misa Ingalls, who was an inspiration for doing this, who had this terrible form of breast cancer called metastatic triple negative breast cancer. But we're really trying to bring together the very best effort that we could to bear on a patient with cancer. And so this is just a brief summary of how this worked, describing one of our patients. And this isn't Misa, this is another patient who was on our trial, where this just shows what happened to this patient over the course of her treatment over 9 months, in trying to make the best recommendations and understand as well as we possibly could what was happening. And for this one patient, we were able to bring together 32 researchers from 14 different institutions. 20 of these researchers had no prior involvement in patient care, and 18 researchers were recruited around the world because of findings that we made specifically in this patient. And we also had the involvement of companies, not just academic centers, but also companies. And this is just, you know, one of the interesting things that happened with this patient was she had a novel mutation in a gene that we thought could be important for her cancer. And so, but it wasn't known, not enough's known about that mutation. Could that mutation be important? And might it give us a clue of a treatment that we could give that might help treat her cancer? And so we contacted, you know, looked on the internet, figured out who are the world's experts about this gene and who could give us the information that we might be, lacking and that we would need to better understand this mutation. And so we sent emails to these experts in Boston, Germany, Taiwan, Brian Drucker in Portland. But the most interesting thing was I sent an email to one of my colleagues at the University of Washington. He's a super famous scientist, David Baker. He told me he didn't think he could help me, but unbeknownst to me, he forwarded my email to his colleague, Lance Stewart, and unbeknownst to me, he forwarded my email to this guy, Dan Flynn, in Lawrence, Kansas, who runs a company there. And it turned out Dan Flynn had tremendous insight into how this might work. And so based on that, we tried a treatment in this patient. Sadly, it didn't work for her. But the point is that there is a whole world of expertise out there and people that are willing to lend their expertise to help a patient with cancer. And that was very, very impressive to me. This clinical trial for patients with metastatic triple negative breast cancer continues in collaboration with Northwest Medical Specialties. We've had now, I think, over 50 patients since 2013, and we've learned a lot. And then now, a little more than 5 years ago, I was having some hip pain. I finally got an X-ray, and what you can see here, it might not be super obvious, but if you compare the left side of my pelvic bone, or I guess this is the right side of my pelvic bone, to the left, you can see this egg-shaped hole that's kind of eating through my bone. It turned out that this is cancer, and you can see it better here on an MRI, a big tumor that's eating through the bone. It turned out that I had multiple myeloma, a form of blood cancer that's not super uncommon. And it's the kind of blood cancer that had I had this 20 years ago, it's very unlikely I'd be alive today. It's fortunately for me, a form of cancer where there's been tremendous progress in the last 20 years. And I certainly owe my life to that progress. And so I started, after I got myeloma and after I was into my treatment, I started a company called All for Cure. Why did I do that? And this is trying to explain the reason. So this is me getting biopsies. This is my doctor, Pam Becker, who is doing a biopsy. I got, lots of biopsies with the same people that were doing biopsies on our breast cancer patients. Now they came to do biopsies on me to try to understand the molecular features of my tumor. But then as I started on my treatment, I came to appreciate a problem that I had not thought about in the same way previously. And so this is a very simplified diagram of the treatment decisions that I've had. At any given point, I have to decide, am I going to do X, Y, or Z? And I'm a lot of times the answer is not obvious. And the information that I have upon which to base a decision is inadequate. And so I kind of make my choice, I go down the path, and then I'm confronted by the next decision. I go the next way, I'm confronted by the next decision. And it's this kind of, ad hoc process where I'm just flying by the seat of my pants, trying to figure out what the best decision is for me. And what I would most want to know as a patient is, what did every other myeloma patient decide to do? What were their treatment choices and what were their outcomes? And because that information didn't exist, that's why I started All for Cure. So All for Cure has an online knowledge sharing platform for patients, clinicians, and researchers. We're focused initially on multiple myeloma. And once we establish a beachhead and things are working well in myeloma, we'll extend to other cancers. But patients can, so patients can come, they can register at All for Cure by signing up. It's a pretty simple sign up process. And then once patients register for our platform, they allow us to access their medical records. And we ask for permission to access all of the medical records from all of the institutions where the patients received care. And what that can look like is stacks of paper. Fortunately, it doesn't look like this very often anymore. We have a lot of electronic access. But what we do is we take all of the medical records from all of the different places, pull them together. We have an expert team that pulls out information to pull out the real essential nuggets of information that we then display on a patient's dashboard. And so this looks cooler when you're on the platform live than it does here, but we take away the patient's name, we give the patient a unique identifying number, and then you can see all of these little circles. They're all kind of jammed together here, so they don't really look like circles, but if you zoom in enough, you'll see on this day, this patient took this dose of this medicine. So it's a chronology of all of the treatments the patients received. And then down here are labs that show whether the treatments are working. Multiple myeloma, the effectiveness of treatments can often be measured with a blood test. So you can just monitor over time how these labs are doing. You can look at other labs that you can click on or off. But it's a way of kind of within a single graph, encapsulate what's going on with that patient and their cancer. So you can kind of within, a few seconds have a general understanding of what's going on. And then so the graph is at the top of a patient dashboard, but the dashboard also has an about panel that provides a higher level view of some of the key features of that patient's cancer, a narrative that is a thoughtfully put together summary of everything that's happened in the patient, and a discussion panel where the patient or any of more than 1,200, currently 1,200 other participants can post comments or questions about that patient's situation. This just shows that we're super rigorous about making sure to the best of our ability that the information that's displayed on a patient's All4Cure dashboard is accurate as we can make it. And we go through an extensive process within All4Cure, and then we show the patient what we have, and we ask the patient, to help us make sure that the data is accurate, help us correct any inaccuracies or answer any unresolved questions. And then we follow up and repeat this process so that we stay in touch with what's going on in the patient in near real time. Clinicians, so oncologists and other clinical personnel can register. And so they sign up on All4Cure. They get a dashboard. This is the dashboard of Ken Anderson, who's probably one of the best known myeloma experts in the world at Harvard. And then once you sign up for All4Cure, you get access to a database that shows you allows you to look at the dashboards of more than 500 patients with multiple myeloma. We also have developed this other really kind of nerdy, cool summarization tool that will where we've carefully inspected the treatments and responses of all of the patients that are in All4Cure. And we have assigned, so we figured out, okay, what are the therapies or lines of therapy that each patient has received? What were the treatment start dates and stop dates? And did the treatment work or not? What was the level of response? And so we've done that for now over 500 patients, over 1,500 different treatments, over, I forget what this number is, but a lot of unique treatments or different treatments, I should say, across those patients. And this allows you to really see some amazingly cool things, I think. It's beginning to provide the kind of information that I've wanted as a patient. As I'm thinking about my next treatment decision, I want to know, what did everybody else decide to do and what were their outcomes? And then when I make my decision, my experience can add to this ever growing, ever improving body of knowledge. And so this is just an example where you can show that, what were the initial first choices that patients made? And, what were the first treatments? So I'm a patient with myeloma, I'm about ready to start treatment. Well, what did everybody else do? And I think of it kind of similar to, getting ready to walk up, a trailhead, going up to, hiking around Mount Rainier or something. And as I'm starting my path, how many different, trailheads or paths do I have to choose from? How many different first steps are there in the treatment of myeloma? And one of the really surprising things to me and many other people is, if you just look across our patients, there were over 90 different first treatments for patients with myeloma. So huge variation in the treatment of myeloma at the very outset of therapy. And that was surprising. There are a number of really cool things about this database. And I think now we're beginning to be able to provide patients with the kind of information that I've wanted to know, as I'm embarking on my next therapeutic decision, what did everybody else do? What were their outcomes? And then these are just three quick examples of patients who have benefited from participation in All4Cure. These are actually kind of dated examples. We've helped hundreds of patients. We've helped them in many different ways. These just highlight 3 different ways. And so this is MM80s, was an Alaska Airlines flight attendant, marathon runner, who developed a really aggressive form of myeloma. And she was going to be sent for a stem cell transplant, but she ended up having myeloma get into her spinal fluid around her brain, which was a very, very serious problem, and for which there weren't good treatments. And so we were able to get suggestions from these experts at different institutions about what might be done for her. Her doctor followed those suggestions, and that cleared the cells from the cerebrospinal fluid, so that allowed her to get back into a state where she could go ahead to receive 2 stem cell transplants. So I actually got her out of hospice so she could go on to get 2 stem cell transplants. This is a patient who learned through her participation in All for Cure. She lives in Southern California. She worked at the San Diego Zoo, but she found out that her treatment was different from the treatment of most other patients with myeloma who were who were participating in All for Cure. And she's probably not getting, her treatment was probably not as good as the treatment that most of our other patients were getting. And so after learning that, she decided to change doctors and ended up on more conventional, probably better treatment. And so this is the idea of democratizing knowledge. So a patient can know how their treatment compares to today hundreds, but eventually thousands of other patients in a way that's not constrained by geography. You could live in Nome, Alaska, and know how your treatment compares to thousands of other patients someday. And this is a patient who was responding well to his treatment and was doing great, but his insurance company said, hey, these drugs you're taking are super expensive and they have not been shown to be effective in your situation, and we're not going to pay for it anymore. And so he appealed this decision, his doctor's office appealed this decision, and the insurance company denied those appeals. So we put together a letter where we were able to show the insurance company that not only was this treatment strategy working for this patient, but we had another patient in All for Cure who was getting the same treatment, and that worked for him as well. And so, so we were able to say, this patient's doctor isn't doing crazy things. Here's a different patient, different doctor who have taken the same approach, and it's working for them as well. And based on that, then the insurance company granted that appeal. So you think about it, how do doctors decide what treatments to use? Or how do insurance companies decide what treatments to pay for? And right now, those decisions are based on publications and guidelines by expert panels. But what if those decisions could also be informed by the results of our collective experience, the treatments and the outcomes of everyone? And so I think this is my last slide. At All for Cure, we are a company that I made All for Cure a for-profit company because I believe that achieving our goals will require that we generate a lot of financial resources that will be needed to achieve our vision of transforming the way that cancer is taken care of. And so there's no charge to patients or clinicians or researchers for participating. We are aiming to generate revenue from pharmaceutical companies that will have a better view of how their drugs work and some of the challenges of treating cancer patients. And whenever you are in a situation where our allegiance is with the patient, but we're getting paid by the insurance company or by the pharmaceutical companies, it creates a potential for a conflict of interest. And so we've set out 4 pillars that our company will never deviate from, to assure that we are always consistently working in our patient's best interest.